So today I'll be talking on reimagining assessment in physics laboratory, and here just incorporating assessment of for and as learning in the physics laboratory. Otto Young, as mentioned earlier, assistant professor in physics department. So I'm in physics education group at Durham University. And some of the key research interest of mine is things relating to research skills, hidden curriculum, and incorporating tools into teaching and learning. Yeah. So that's what I'll be presenting on, more on the assessment, incorporating tools on the assessment design too. And the overview of my presentation goes as follows. So I'll highlight a couple of things on the terminologies, and then talked a little about the motivation for the approach that I took and how the approach was applied, and then some findings from feedback, both from staff and students, and also the MEQs. Yeah, so that's it. So I'll start with this definition of what assessment is by Palumba and Banta. I really appreciate it. He said, assessment is a systematic collection, review, and the use of information about the educational program undertaken to improve student learning and development. I think the emphasis there is improving student learning and development. So that, which means that the different kinds of assessments, and deciding on what suits best is also another thing that we need to consider. So some of the assessment types are here. I will be highlighting 3 different types of assessments. And the first one I'll be going on will be assessment for learning. Yeah, most of us, we are familiar with some of these assessment types of assessment. So for the assessment for learning is more to provide feedback to guide students and also to instruct students in it, and the instructor with the aim to improve learning process. So here it enhances student learning through feedback. So, and many times it's always formative feedback. And then it also provides a feed-forward mechanism in which the feedback is obtained and then used to improve other work that the student have to do. And I think here, one of the things I'm really advocating here is that the assessment design doesn't necessarily need to be the assessment in your module. So you can use a design from another module and feed forward into your module. So that's one of the things that I'm really advocating for. And also another thing is to allow students to identify their strengths and their weaknesses and things they should really focus to improve based on the feedback they obtain. And then the other bit is assessment of learning, which is the big bit of the assessment. Higher percentage of the assessment is a summative assessment, which is more like the exam test and things like that, and is actually focused on measuring the achievement or evaluating the learning outcome from students. So it's always assessed periodically, measures achievement, evaluates student learning. It certifies knowledge and skills sometimes, and also measures the ability to apply learning to real-world problems. Many times students ask, okay, I'm doing this course, how will I apply it in future? So having a form of a summative assessment that can grant students opportunities to do things that they would naturally be doing in their careers is very, very good approach here. And the final type is the assessment as learning. So this is where it involves personal work, self-reflection. So here, a reflective process where students engage in a self-regulated and self-assessment and critical thinking to take ownership of the learning. So here, emphasis is on students' ability to assess their progress. So they need to sit back, look at the feedback, think about their process of learning. What could they improve? How can they improve on what they are doing? So it also inspires adjustments for improvement. So students looking at how they can improve. It enables independent learning. So that's with the aim to get a student to be a self-regulated learner. So I will talk more on that. But with all these 3 different kinds of assessment, we need to find a suitable blend that suits the model that we are teaching or the course we are actually teaching. So here I will be sitting. The presentation today is to emphasize on how I blended these different kinds of assessments. Sometimes some blends don't really work, so you just need to think about a balance. And the aim of this was to drive continuous learning and improvement among the students based on what I noticed from the model as at the time I took it up, and to promote self-regulated learning and academic success. So the learner, what we are expecting from the learner is that the learner needs to be self-directed, it needs to be motivated, self-motivated, and also be prepared for whatever tasks that they need to do in the future. So, but as well as designing it to incorporate all of these kind of assessments, it's quite difficult to do it like that without the support of tools. So it's quite relevant. There are many tools. We've just heard about AI tools helping out. Yeah, so there are many tools that are available that could help in different forms of assessment based on the design you have. So here, these are a couple of tools that I've come across in my teaching profession here. And also the strong evidence that using these tools, they improve student engagement, they improve the delivery as well. So, but here in the case study that I'll be showing later, I'll be using this couple of tools, which is PS Scholar, Turnitin, Ultra, All, and Teams. So PS Scholar and Turnitin embedded in Ultra. I'm using Teams for the organization, that's the staff organization, because it requires more than myself. Yeah, and yeah, so moving on to the case study, I'll start with the structure. So the model that I'm applying the assessment process design is actually a lab-based model in level to a year 2 lab-based model. And the way it is designed is such that it has a career employability seminars. It also have computational physics workshop, which teaches students how to write codes using Python codes to actually do some data analysis or plot graphs. But at the same time, across the year, you have 6 weeks of skills lab. The skills lab, what is involved is that it teaches some key concepts on data analysis, hypothesis testing, and things like that, and data acquisition, a little on data acquisition, but more on the electronics is on data acquisition. And then the 6 weeks for the for the research lab is an open-ended project that a student is given 6 weeks to run on, and they work in teams. So what I did there was to try and get the student to feedback whatever skills that they have acquired in other section of the model into the section that I'm actually organizing. So that's the design. And then, yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the model is a research project. So my emphasis now will be on this particular bit. So it's an open-ended project, 6 weeks. It runs for 6 weeks. Each week, a student have 3 hours in the lab. And then it counts to the higher percentage of all the contributions that I showed in the previous slides. And we have 12 projects. And on the 12 projects, we have about 8 project supervisors on the project. So I had to use teams to organize the project supervision team, and then use peer scholar and the rest of the tools to do the assessment and delivery of the whole thing. So the model I use here is that the project is actually within the Black region, the 6 weeks, but prior to that, they have some form of exercises that helps them develop skills. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So this gives a more detailed overview of that. So that's the early 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks, I give them a kind of exercise, a literature review exercise, which involves them using Web of Science to actually search for literature. So that's what I did and at the end of the second week, prior to the start of their project, I actually released the solution to that, which gives them They can then compare their exercises, not mandatory, but it actually helps them to find out how to find relevant literatures using Web of Science, how to review a literature search that they have. So that's one of the things they do. And then we have pilot experiment the first 2 weeks. And at the end of the first 2 weeks, they provide a one-page project overview. The project overview, the contents of it must be that a short literature review of your project, and then hypotheses that you're trying to you've developed, how you're going to test the hypothesis, preliminary data, and some few literature. That's references that you had. And that's to be submitted at the end of the first 2 weeks, which is the create phase of the peer review process. The peer review process has create, assess, and reflect phase. So it's just the submission. Create phase is submission. And then after that 2 weeks, they are given 1 week to actually review. They are assigned 2 colleagues to review their work. This gives them access to other people's writing styles. And also some students have also mentioned that they came across references that they weren't familiar with, but they can then apply to their work. So they do the literature, but at the same time, during that peer review process, your tutors assess the project overview summatively. That's it counts to a mark. Yeah, so I think I'm going to talk more about that. And then after the 2 weeks of peer review process, they then have the reflect phase. So they have 2 weeks left in the project that they can feed forward whatever feedback they got into the project before they finally provide a project report at the end. So after their project, they have 1 week for write-up before the final submission date. So that's the structure of this thing. And now, also emphasis here is that the project report, project overview and the project report are submitted in 2 different platforms. The reason why I did this was because students were more conscious, aware of plagiarism, and they didn't want to self-plagiarize themselves. So that's why we use 2 different platforms, because the literature review there is okay for students to use their literature review as the basis of the introduction in their final report. So that's, and then for the project peer scholar, this is how the peer scholar looks like. So you have the project that you are actually, the assessment that is provided, the project, and then you have create, assess, and reflect phase. Each of those have timelines, and then the supervisor grades the student through that the menu across them. And for the student, what it looks like on the platform is that the student provide feedback on the left column to their peers. The student submission is in the middle, and to the right is the tutor's assessment. Both the tutors and the students use the same rubrics as well in the assessment process. And then findings. So the first finding that we had, the statistics that we had, previously before we applied this, we had, for this particular module, they also had journal keeping. And previously, before then, what we observe is that about 60% of the students actually upload their journals in the last week of the project because they have a deadline, which means that the student, the reason why it was designed, the assessment as learning component wasn't being affected properly. So, but looking at here, the student engaged, we had almost 100% of the students submitting a project overview, and also about 90% of them engaged in the peer review process, which meant that I felt happy with that, because at least we have achieved the aim that we wanted to. The reason why the assessment as learning components of it has been achieved. But also the reflect phase, we had a reduced number, 60%. The point is that that section didn't count. There was no credit attached to that. So I think the credit attached to the assess phase also motivated some of the students to engage with it. And looking at the gradings, this is the grades by both the staff and students. So that's from the tutor, and that's from the students. We can see that students are more generous in their marks, but this also calls for more information, providing more information on their assessment criteria, because probably what they are looking at is that they haven't looked at the individual criteria, because the individual criteria, they've seen the proforma, which is the assessment the proforma, that's what is required, the question, but the criteria for each of these grades, what is expected. I think I need to do a little more work on that this coming year. It's also indicating the total mark as well. Students are more generous in the grading their colleagues higher. And also it might also be possible because of their level of understanding as well. They measure whatever they are marking based on their capability, and they could then, which meant that if it's quite good, better than what they have, they feel, yeah, they will grade higher. And then looking on to the feedback generally on the design itself. So we had students feedback coming along with a good opportunity. I was grateful to be able to use Telescope as to do a work. So yeah, grateful for great opportunities. We also had students talking about skills acquisition, that there was a range of skills acquired, because yeah, like the reflective, the project, the review process, it helps the student to understand the criteria, like assessment criteria for things, which is a transferable skill that is quite relevant for the future as well. So independence in learning, that's another thing that came through. We also had some students mentioning, oh, that it was a great opportunity, that it was a great way to explore topics in depth and experiencing the kind of things a scientist would do. So feeling that, oh, this is the life of a scientist. This is how possible experience of working as a scientist. Not all of it was positive, so there were also some. The first year I did this, I also had a request for exemplars. But personally, I don't, in my own opinion, I don't advocate for exemplars. So what I did the following year is to tell them the reason why I'm not giving them exemplars. So one of the things I've learned from this experience is telling the students the reason why you are doing stuff. And when you tell them the reason, they tend to see the reasons for it, and then they will engage more with it. So rather than giving them exemplars, I rather gave them a template which outlined the different sections of the project overview and what you could add into those sections. So that's what I provided them. And at the end of this year, I didn't have any comments on that this year. We also had some students talking about time constraint, because it's 6 weeks, that they would have rather loved to do it in a longer term, the project, but they were constrained to that. But also in that, they need to understand they were also developing a time management skills, project management skills in that period, because it's constrained to 6 weeks. Feedback from staff on the whole, yep, they also, staff members, they said they were more improved critical thinking in the project. The students began to think deeper after the first pilot experiment, and they were able to ask direct and applied questions. Also that student engagement had been improved as well. We also had a comment on workload. Yeah, the reason for the comment for workload was that staff members were also reviewing students' feedback, which meant that they need to also see the feedback that the student provided to others. That really increased the workload. So what I did the following year was that I excluded that they do the marking, just focus on the marking, and the feedback bits, I will do that. I will just give short videos on how to give constructive feedback and things like that. And we also observe innovative project ideas. Yeah, especially this past year, we had some ideas that weren't achievable within the lab due to risk assessments. Yeah, so but that the student thought of some of those ideas were something useful and good to hear. And then based on the whole tool itself, feedback on the tool. So we had that, a couple of feedback that there's consistency and transparency in marking. Because a rubrics was used as well, so they could see that consistency and and transparency. They also mentioned that it was great to see the dual purpose of feedback, giving and receiving feedback. So that was a positive there. And students also mentioned that it broadens the students' exposure to diverse styles of writing and literature awareness via their, so students were able to see what literatures their colleagues are using and then making reference to those, reading the literature, and that also applied to how they develop their hypothesis and how they plan to implement, because some of the hypotheses they developed were not it couldn't be implemented, but by seeing what other people did or what it broadened their mindset as well. We had an enhanced student critical thinking. That's one. One of the students, I think it's useful to building skills because it allows development of knowledge of how the assessment works. That's more on the marking criteria, the marking rubrics. Right. Then for the demerit, yes. Students mentioned, for the very high intelligence students, their feedback was very robust, but some of them, what they obtained was based on the level of because it's a diverse student cohort as well. So based on whoever your work was assigned to, they tend to see that variability in the quality of feedback provided back. And for the staff, I think the second one limitation of the tool interface was a staff comment, which the staff felt I would have preferred just a click to do the assessment. Multiple clicks increases the workload as well. So that's one of the things. And there was also the issues about the ambiguity between the formative and summative component, which I'm still trying to figure out how to fix that, because the same document is assessed summatively by their supervisor, but at the same time, the same document is assessed formatively by their colleagues. So I think I need to, what I would rather feel is that making that very clear during the introductory lectures that I will be providing. And suggestion for improvement was more on the formatting improvement, that's the clicks. Addressing the glitch, a couple of students, about 5 students, one of them had 4 students assigned to them because it was automatically set up, and while some did not have, about 2 students did not have anyone assigned to them. So fixing such glitches. So in overall, so in conclusion, I would here presented that we need a good blend of assessment for us learning to create a learning environment that promotes self-regulated learner. That's students that are motivated, self-motivated, self-directed. And prepared for the future world, because the technological landscape is changing. So our students need to be adaptable for that as well. So intentionally adapting assessment design to ensure the development of vital skills. So the motivation is core skills, transferable skills we need to develop that in our assessment, help us then develop those core skills through. And peers and self-assessment can significantly improve student engagement. The statistics shows that. And many times we can't do without tools. So tools are our friend. We can use them to deliver and facilitate the delivery and the adaptation of the assessment design. I think with that, thank you very much for your attention.